In my yoga classes, we use the yoga block for more than just bringing the ground up higher for us so that we don't have to stretch down as far in our yoga poses. Now, just to be clear, I think that using the block in that way is an excellent way to use the yoga block, and we do definitely use the blocks in helpful ways like that in my classes. But in addition to using the block that way, we also use the yoga block in some creative and novel ways in my yoga classes in order to turn up the challenge in our yoga asanas. And that typically looks like turning up the challenge in terms of strength and asking the body to work harder and adding more load to our yoga poses. So with that said, I'm going to present my top 5 favorite ways to use a yoga block for strength in our yoga poses. And if you appreciate this content, subscribe to my channel so you can stay up to date on all of the content that I share. This yoga block move is a variation on reverse table pose. So reverse table generally looks like this: hands back behind, feet out in front, and we lift up. Now, if we wanted to use yoga blocks to make reverse table more challenging, we could take 2 yoga blocks, place our feet on top of those blocks, and then lift up into reverse table. And to make this more challenging, kind of more potentially strengthening, I like to do repeated lifts, so lowering and lifting. And the reason that this works is that by elevating our feet higher than the ground, we move our hips into more hip flexion. That puts the tissues of our posterior hip on more of a stretch. And then those muscles, especially like the glutes back here, they're asked to work in a more lengthened position in order to lift us up. So targeting our muscles for strength at longer lengths and through longer ranges of motion is a great way to stimulate strength adaptations. Now that was with 2 blocks, one under each foot. But then I have another variation of reverse table that is even more work. So in this variation, we still have a block under a foot, but we actually lift one leg off the floor. This is going to be a single leg reverse table with our foot on the block. So then this looks like this. And because one leg is off the floor, that's like basically effectively doubling the load on the leg that's down. And so now this single leg that's down has the benefit of being elevated up on the block for that increased range of motion, and it has more load because the other leg is lifted. So this is really like top of the line when it comes to a strengthening variation, a reverse table. And it's all because we are using the handy yoga block. In this yoga block strength move, we start in a face down position, so fully prone, lying down, with our arms out in front of us. And then we hug our hands into the block. So we press into the block, and head can be down on the floor. Basically, everything will be on the floor, except that we will lift the block up with our arms. So it looks like this. And that is a great and a very strong way to target our shoulders in end range of shoulder flexion. So in that fully overhead position. Using the block is great because if we were just to take our arms forward without the block, it would be easy to let the arms kind of like track out a little bit wider than straight forward overhead, because straight forward overhead requires a little more mobility, a little more flexibility to have that narrower stance. So without the block, it's a little easier to bring our arms out wide, and it's totally fine to lift the arms when they're wider. But you'll find that it is more work and more effort to lift them when they're closer. So the block ensures like this narrower stance of the hands, the arms. But in addition, the block, I know yoga blocks tend to be pretty lightweight, but even a lightweight block will still serve as a little bit of added load, especially because we're holding it all the way out there at the end of our arms, at the end of these long levers of our straight arms. And so that always magnifies the load of like whatever we're holding. So even a lightweight block will feel a lot heavier. And then if you happen to be using like a wooden block, then yay, you have a lot of extra load that you get to work with. So these block lifts, like overhead block lifts, are a really great way to work on strength and also mobility at the same time. You can do a lift up and a hold, like isometrically for time, or you could do several lifts and lowers, lift up, lower down, lift up, lower down. And then if you really wanted to bring in a nice challenge, you could lift the block and lift the whole body up into Shalabhasana. So that would look something like block up and chest, head, legs, everything up. And then I'm in full locust pose, full Shalabhasana, while holding that block straight out overhead. So that is another yoga block strength move that I love. This yoga block strength move will target our hip flexor muscles. Those are the muscles that cross the front of our hip, and they perform hip flexion. So they move our leg closer to our torso. So for this move, we start in staff pose or Dandasana, and then we do our best to maintain a nice tall spine. So we're not gonna like kind of slouch back, but try to stay up nice and tall, and then simply lift one leg up and over that block without touching the block, and then lift up and right on over. And so that's what it looks like. And you can play with variations of this. You could change the height of the block if you wanted to challenge more. You could also take the block out wider if you wanted to move through a wider path of movement. And like I said, this is a great way to challenge and potentially strengthen the hip flexors. And they're in a shortened range here. So it's end range strengthening for the hip flexors in a shortened position. And we also target the quadriceps here. Those muscles are also working to keep this knee straight as we lift up and over. And I'm pretty sure that you will feel all the way up the thigh and those hip flexors if you try this one. This yoga block strength move involves 2 yoga blocks, and this will target our hamstring muscles on the backs of our thighs. So the hamstrings cross the hip joint and they cross the knee joint. So in order to really target the hamstrings and get them to work, we ideally want to perform hip extension combined with straight-ish knees. That's like the magical combo to fire up our hamstrings in terms of asking them to work. So we will have that combination here if we lie all the way back. I like to cross my arms across my chest and then simply dig my heels down into the blocks and lift my hips up. So it's not a huge range of motion, but hopefully you can see my pelvis is off the floor here. And then I'm gonna lower down. So here I will do a few repetitions of lifting and lowering. This is firing up my hamstrings. I'm performing hip extension and the hamstrings are crossing the knee. And so I'm working knee flexion, but with straightish knees. So this is a great way to target the hamstrings. You can do repeated lifts like I'm showing, or you could lift up and hold isometrically for time. And you'll definitely feel these hamstrings really start to burn and talk to you. This yoga block strength move is a core targeter. And to be more specific, it's really an anterior core targeter targeting the abdominals and the hip flexors. And here is what it looks like. So we lie on our back. We take one block straight up in between our hands and then legs straight up. And then I call this pass the block core. And it's kind of a fun one. We simply pass the block from our hands to our feet and then lower our legs just as far as we are able to press our low back into the ground. And at the same time, we lower our arms overhead. So this is a lot of demand on the core. Then we come up and we switch. See how I kind of dropped the block and I caught it with my hands? And then same deal, lower the arms, lower the legs, and then up and we switch, and then we lower and we lift. So pass the block core. Hopefully you can see why I think this one is like a little bit fun. It's kind of like we're playing with the block at the same time that we are creating a lot of good work for our anterior core. So I really love this yoga block strength move.